Admiral Zephrix stood on the bridge of the flagship Dominion's Pride, his scaled hands clasped behind his back as he gazed at the blue-green world spinning lazily below. Earth. The latest addition to the Galactic Empire's ever-expanding collection of conquered worlds. His serpentine eyes glowed with satisfaction as he reviewed the intelligence reports one final time. The humans had surrendered after a brief orbital bombardment demonstration. No prolonged resistance. No heroic last stands. Just a simple transmission of unconditional surrender from their primitive governments. It had been almost disappointingly easy. Commander Vax, Zephrix called to his second-in-command, an insectoid warrior whose chitinous armor gleamed under the bridge's harsh lighting. What is the status of the human military forces? Vex's mandibles clicked as he consulted his datapad. Completely disbanded, Admiral. Their weapons have been confiscated and destroyed. The humans claim they have no organized military structure remaining. They appear to be a pacified species now. Zephrix's forked tongue flicked out in what passed for amusement among his kind. How typical. Another soft species that crumbles at the first sign of real power. Deploy the occupation forces to the major population centers. Standard protocol: establish control, extract resources, and begin integration into the Empire. The Admiral turned his attention to the holographic display showing Earth's continents. The humans had been remarkably cooperative, providing detailed maps and demographic information. Their major cities were clearly marked, along with industrial centers and government facilities. Everything seemed straightforward. What the display didn't show, however, were the vast wilderness areas that covered much of the planet's surface. Dense forests, towering mountains, scorching deserts, and frozen tundra regions that the Empire's analysts had dismissed as uninhabited wasteland in their reports. Colonel Croth, the Empire's chief military strategist, approached the Admiral. His rock-like skin was scarred from countless battles across the galaxy. Admiral, I've been reviewing the human cultural data. There's something unusual about their history. Unusual how? Zephrix asked, though his tone suggested mild disinterest. They have an extensive record of what they call guerrilla warfare. Small unit tactics in difficult terrain. But our interrogations suggest their current military was entirely conventional standing armies, naval fleets, air forces. No mention of these historical tactics. Zephrix waved a clawed hand dismissively. Ancient history, Colonel. Primitive tactics from their pre-spaceflight era. Once a species achieves interstellar capability, they invariably adopt conventional military structures. It's a natural progression. 3 days after the initial occupation began, the first transport ships descended toward Earth's major cities. The humans had been true to their word: no anti-aircraft fire, no desperate attacks on landing zones. The occupation forces deployed smoothly into New York, London, Beijing, Mumbai, and dozens of other population centers. Captain Thorne, leading the occupation of Atlanta, found the humans to be unexpectedly compliant. They gathered in designated areas when ordered, handed over personal weapons without protest, and answered questions with what seemed like genuine cooperation. It was almost eerily peaceful. "This is too easy," muttered Sergeant Grax, a veteran of 12 conquest campaigns. His gray skin was marked with ritual scars from his homeworld. "I've never seen a species this passive during occupation." Captain Thorne nodded, but kept his concerns to himself. The humans were certainly different from the usual conquest targets. Most species either fought desperately or collaborated enthusiastically, hoping to gain favor with their new rulers. These humans seemed to be doing neither; they were simply waiting. Dr. Sarah Chen stood in the crowd of civilians as the alien soldiers processed them through checkpoints. Her face showed the same resigned compliance as everyone around her, but her mind was working furiously. She memorized details about their equipment, their procedures, their apparent weaknesses. Sarah had spent 15 years in the Marine Corps before becoming a biologist. The surrender had come so quickly that most people didn't even know there were still organized resistance elements. The government had made the decision to surrender openly while secretly activating protocols that had been planned for decades. As she watched the aliens sort through the crowd, Sarah noticed something important. They were treating this like a routine occupation of a civilized urban area. Their tactics were designed for controlling infrastructure and organized populations. They had no idea what was waiting for them beyond the city limits. That night, as Admiral Zephrix reviewed the day's reports, everything seemed to be proceeding according to plan. 67 major population centers were under Imperial control. Human leaders were cooperating with the transition to Imperial governance. Resource extraction operations would begin within the week. Admiral, Commander Vex approached with a slight hesitation in his movements. There's been a minor incident. One of our patrols in the North American sector has gone missing. Missing? Zephrix's eyes narrowed. Elaborate. A standard reconnaissance unit was conducting a survey of the region the humans call the Appalachian Mountains. They missed their scheduled check-in 18 hours ago. Their last transmission indicated they were investigating some abandoned human structures. Send a search and rescue team, Zephrix ordered. Probably equipment failure or an accident in unfamiliar terrain. The humans assured us those regions were uninhabited. What Admiral Zephrix didn't know was that the abandoned structures his patrol had found were actually hunting cabins, deliberately left stocked and maintained by people who had melted into the wilderness at the first sign of invasion. The missing patrol wasn't victims of equipment failure, they had encountered Tom Bradley and his team. Tom Bradley had been a Force Reconnaissance Marine for 12 years before retiring to work as a hunting guide in West Virginia. When the invasion came, he had simply vanished into the mountains he knew better than his own backyard. He wasn't alone. Across Earth, thousands of similar individuals had activated plans that had been quietly developed for exactly this scenario. The Empire had conquered civilizations, but they had never faced hunters. As Tom examined the alien equipment his team had captured, he smiled grimly. The weapons were energy-based and sophisticated, but the aliens who carried them moved through the forest like tanks on a highway. They had no concept of stealth, no understanding of how to move without leaving traces, and no idea that they were being watched by eyes that had learned their skills tracking creatures far more dangerous than any alien soldier. In the urban areas, the occupation continued smoothly. But, in the vast wilderness that covered most of Earth's surface, a different kind of war was about to begin. The Empire had dismissed humanity's hunters as irrelevant primitives. They were about to learn the difference between conquering a civilization and conquering the people who had built it. The rescue team that Admiral Zephrix dispatched never returned either. Neither did the reinforced company he sent after them. Within 2 weeks, 17 Imperial patrols had simply vanished in the wilderness areas of North America alone. Similar reports were trickling in from the forests of Scandinavia, the jungles of South America, and the mountains of Central Asia. Commander Vex's mandibles clicked nervously as he delivered the latest casualty reports. Admiral, we've lost contact with 43 patrols across the planet. No distress signals, no bodies recovered, no evidence of conventional weapons fire. They simply disappear. Admiral Zephrix studied the tactical display showing the missing patrol locations. All of them were in remote areas, far from the human population centers his forces controlled. What do our intelligence assets say about these regions? The human collaborators insist these areas are uninhabited wilderness. Our orbital scans confirm minimal technological signatures, no power grids, no communication networks, no industrial facilities. According to all our data, nothing should be out there. But something was out there. In the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest, Marcus Webb crouched motionless in a camouflaged hide he'd constructed from fallen logs and native vegetation. A former Army Ranger who'd spent his civilian years as a wilderness survival instructor, Marcus had been watching the alien patrol for 3 hours. The 4-member Imperial squad moved through the forest with all the subtlety of a freight train. Their armor clanked against branches, their energy weapons hummed audibly, and they left a trail that any first-year Boy Scout could have followed blindfolded. They paused frequently to consult their scanning devices, completely unaware that their electromagnetic emissions had been detected by simple radio equipment hours ago. Marcus touched the throat microphone hidden beneath his ghillie suit. Eagle's Nest, this is Wolverine. Package is in position. Initiating harvest protocol. The response came through his bone conduction earpiece. Copy, Wolverine. Harvest authorized. Remember, no alien tech left behind. The aliens never knew what hit them. One moment they were scanning for signs of human habitation, the next moment they were unconscious on the forest floor. Marcus and his team used tranquilizer darts fired from homemade air rifles, weapons that produced no energy signature and left no chemical traces the aliens could detect. Within minutes, the patrol's equipment was being carefully documented and packaged for study. The aliens themselves were secured in a hidden cave system that had been prepared months in advance. They would be kept alive for intelligence gathering, but, as far as Imperial records were concerned, they had simply vanished without a trace. Dr. Sarah Chen had made her way out of Atlanta 3 days after the occupation began. Her escape had been embarrassingly easy. The aliens were focused on controlling the humans who stayed, not tracking the ones who quietly disappeared. She now found herself in a concealed facility deep in the Appalachian Mountains, studying captured Imperial technology alongside dozens of other scientists and engineers who had slipped away from the cities. The energy weapons are fascinating, she reported to the gathered resistance leaders. They're incredibly efficient, but they require exotic matter power sources that we can't replicate. However, the armor has some interesting vulnerabilities. Colonel James Harrison, formerly of the 82nd Airborne, leaned forward. What kind of vulnerabilities? The suits are designed to deflect energy weapons and high-velocity projectiles, but they have virtually no protection against chemical agents. A simple pepper spray derivative would incapacitate the wearer instantly. Also, their environmental seals are surprisingly fragile. They're built for sterile spaceship environments, not field conditions. Sarah pulled up a holographic display showing the armor's joint mechanisms. More importantly, they rely heavily on powered servos for movement. Disrupt the power flow, and the armor becomes a prison. I've identified 3 critical junction points that could be disabled with properly placed electromagnetic pulse devices. Meanwhile, on the Imperial flagship, Admiral Zephrix was facing his first real crisis since the occupation began. The mysterious disappearances were accelerating, and his remaining forces were becoming increasingly reluctant to patrol outside the major cities. Admiral, Colonel Crotha's rocky features showed unusual concern. I recommend we consolidate our forces and abandon patrol operations in the wilderness regions. Whatever is happening out there, we're losing troops faster than we can afford. Unacceptable, Zephrix snarled. We cannot allow unknown elements to operate freely on an occupied world. Increase patrol strength. Deploy sensor drones. Use orbital surveillance. We've tried all of that, Admiral. The sensor drones malfunction in certain areas, possibly due to unknown environmental factors. Orbital surveillance shows nothing but empty forest. And our strongest patrols are still disappearing. What the Imperial forces didn't understand was that they were facing an enemy unlike any they had encountered before. The humans they had conquered in the cities were indeed civilians, shopkeepers, office workers, teachers, and students who had never held weapons in their lives. But the humans they were now encountering in the wilderness were cut from different cloth entirely. Jake Morrison had been hunting in the Montana Rockies since he was 8 years old. His father had taught him to track elk through terrain that would challenge a mountain goat, to remain motionless for hours while waiting for the perfect shot, and to survive for weeks with nothing but what he could carry on his back. When the aliens came, Jake had simply done what he'd always done, he'd gone hunting. The difference was that now his prey shot back. Jake's team had developed tactics specifically designed to exploit alien weaknesses. They used traditional hunting techniques combined with improvised technology to create scenarios the Imperial forces couldn't understand or counter. Deadfalls triggered by tripwires. Pit traps concealed with natural materials. Ambushes that relied on patience and perfect timing rather than superior firepower. The key, Jake explained to a group of new recruits who had escaped from the cities, is thinking like prey instead of predators. These aliens are used to conquering other military forces, organized units with weapons and communication systems. They don't know how to fight ghosts. He gestured to the forest around them. This is our territory. We know every tree, every stream, every game trail. We can move through here without leaving a trace, and we can make them chase shadows while we pick them off one by one. The psychological effect on Imperial forces was becoming as important as the physical casualties. Soldiers who had conquered star systems were now afraid to venture beyond the safety of their urban strongholds. They jumped at every sound in the forest, fired at shadows, and reported contacts that investigation teams could never verify. Captain Thorne found himself dealing with increasingly jumpy troops as reports of the disappearances spread through the ranks. "Sir," one of his corporals reported, "the humans in the city are acting strange. They're smiling more." "Smiling?" "Yes, sir. Like they know something we don't. And we're picking up unusual communication patterns. Nothing we can decode, but there's definitely increased activity in the civilian networks." What the Imperial forces were detecting was indeed increased communication, coded messages passing between resistance cells, coordination signals for escape routes, and updates on successful operations in the wilderness. The urban civilians were smiling because they were beginning to believe that their hunters were winning. Admiral Zephrix stared at his latest casualty reports with growing fury. In 3 weeks, he had lost over 200 soldiers without inflicting a single confirmed casualty on the enemy. Worse, he still had no clear picture of what he was fighting. His forces controlled the cities, the spaceports, and the major infrastructure, but vast areas of the planet were becoming no-go zones for Imperial troops. "Admiral," Commander Vex approached hesitantly. "Imperial Command is requesting a status update on the occupation. They're expecting resource extraction to begin within the month." Zephrix turned to his tactical display, which now showed dozens of red zones marked as patrol areas under threat. The zones were expanding daily as more of his forces refused to venture into the wilderness regions. "Tell Imperial Command," he said through gritted teeth, "that we have encountered unexpected resistance elements and require additional time to complete pacification." He didn't mention that he still had no idea who he was fighting, where they were hiding, or how they were managing to defeat his technologically superior forces. All he knew was that somewhere in the vast wilderness of Earth, humanity's hunters were turning his conquest into a nightmare. The turning point came when Admiral Zephrix made his fatal mistake. Frustrated by months of mounting losses and pressure from Imperial Command, he decided to force the issue. If his enemy was hiding in the wilderness, he would simply eliminate the wilderness. "Prepare orbital bombardment of all wilderness regions," he commanded. "Total sterilization. If we cannot control these areas, we will deny them to the enemy." Colonel Crotha's rocky features showed alarm. "Admiral, that would destroy significant portions of the planet's ecosystem. The Empire values worlds for their resources and habitability. Command will not approve such extensive damage." "Then, we do it without telling Command until it's finished," Zephrix replied coldly. "Once the resistance is eliminated, the planet can be reseeded with Imperial-approved vegetation. Begin bombardment preparations." But the humans had been listening. Dr. Chen's team had spent months studying captured Imperial communication equipment, and they had finally cracked the basic encryption protocols. When they intercepted the bombardment orders, a priority message went out through every resistance network on the planet. The hunters were coming home. Tom Bradley received the signal while observing an Imperial supply convoy from his position high in the Appalachian Peaks. After 6 months in the wilderness, he looked more like a mountain man than a former Marine. His beard was thick, his clothes were patched leather and homespun cloth, and his eyes held the steady patience of a predator who had learned his prey's every weakness. "Time to change the rules," he murmured into his throat microphone. "All teams, implement Thunder Run Protocol." Across the planet, similar messages were being transmitted in dozens of languages. In the Amazon rainforest, former Brazilian special forces emerged from hiding. In the Siberian wilderness, Russian hunters shouldered weapons they had crafted from alien technology and human ingenuity. In the Australian outback, Aboriginal trackers began moving toward the cities with skills passed down for 40,000 years. The Empire was about to learn the difference between controlling cities and controlling the people who lived around them. Captain Thorne was reviewing security reports when the lights went out. Not just in his command center, but across the entire Atlanta occupation zone. Backup power systems failed to engage. Communications went dead. Even the supposedly tamper-proof Imperial technology simply stopped functioning. "What's happening?" he shouted in the darkness. His answer came in the form of explosions, small, precisely placed charges that took out key infrastructure points with surgical precision. Power transformers. Communication relays. Vehicle fuel depots. Within 20 minutes, the Imperial force that had controlled a major American city was reduced to a confused mob of soldiers stumbling around in the dark. Then, the real attack began. Sarah Chen led her team through the darkened streets with night vision equipment they had built from captured alien sensors. Every member of her unit had been born and raised in Atlanta. They knew every alley, every storm drain, every shortcut through the urban maze. The Imperial forces knew only their fortified positions, and those positions were now isolated islands in a sea of darkness. "Remember," Sarah whispered to her team, "we're not trying to kill them all. We're trying to capture them. Dead aliens tell no tales, but prisoners can be traded." The humans moved through their own city like ghosts. They used maintenance tunnels the aliens had never bothered to map. They struck from directions the Imperial forces hadn't thought to guard. Most importantly, they used weapons and tactics that the aliens couldn't counter because they didn't understand them. Marcus Webb's team in Seattle had developed what they called spider tactics. Using climbing equipment and knowledge of the city's architecture, they attacked from above and below, appearing on rooftops and emerging from sewers. The Imperial forces, trained for conventional warfare, found themselves helpless against enemies who treated the urban environment like a three-dimensional hunting ground. Jake Morrison had come in from Montana with 100 other wilderness fighters. His team's job was psychological warfare. They moved through the city making sounds, howls, calls, and strange noises that echoed off buildings and created the impression of a much larger force. Imperial soldiers found themselves jumping at shadows, firing at nothing, and calling for help that often never came. But the most devastating attack came from an unexpected direction. The urban civilians who had seemed so passive and cooperative for months suddenly revealed their true nature. Teachers who had quietly memorized alien patrol routes. Shopkeepers who had been tracking equipment's serial numbers. Office workers who had been mapping communication protocols. Dr. Elena Rodriguez had been the head of the Atlanta CDC before the invasion. To the Imperial forces, she was just another cooperative human administrator. What they didn't know was that she had spent months developing biological agents specifically tailored to alien physiology. Not lethal agents, the humans weren't trying to commit genocide. But incapacitating compounds that could neutralize alien forces without permanent harm. When the power went out and the attack began, Elena's team released their preparations into the air circulation systems of every Imperial facility in the city. Within an hour, alien soldiers were collapsing from respiratory paralysis, skin reactions, and nervous system disruption. Their armor protected them from weapons, but not from the very air they breathed. Admiral Zephrix watched in horror as his tactical display showed Imperial forces across the planet going offline simultaneously. Atlanta was dark. London was dark. Beijing was reporting massive coordinated attacks. His occupation force was being systematically dismantled by enemies he had dismissed as primitive hunters. "Admiral!" Commander Vex's voice cracked with panic. "They're inside the ship." Zephrix spun around to see the bridge's blast doors opening to reveal figures in improvised armor carrying weapons that looked like they had been assembled in a garage. But the humans carrying those weapons moved with the confidence of people who knew exactly what they were doing. The leader stepped forward and removed her helmet, revealing the weathered face of a middle-aged woman with gray-streaked hair and intelligent eyes. "Admiral Zephrix, I presume?" "I'm Colonel Maria Santos, formerly of the United States Army Special Forces. I think it's time we had a talk." "Impossible," Zephrix hissed. "This is a Class A Imperial battleship. Our security systems are impenetrable." Colonel Santos smiled. "Your security systems were designed to keep out other spaceships, not people who know how to climb. We've been studying your technology for months, Admiral. Did you really think we spent all that time in the wilderness just hiding?" The truth was devastating in its simplicity. While the Imperial forces had been hunting ghosts in the wilderness, the humans had been learning. Every captured piece of equipment had been studied, reverse-engineered, and improved upon. Every observation of Imperial procedures had been analyzed and countered. The hunters had been hunting, but their prey hadn't been alien soldiers, it had been alien technology, tactics, and weaknesses. Your orbital bombardment plans are cancelled, Colonel Santos continued. In fact, all of your operations on Earth are suspended as of now. You're going to send a message to Imperial Command explaining that humanity has refused your generous offer of conquest and that you recommend they find somewhere else to expand their empire. The Empire does not negotiate with primitives, Zephrix snarled. That's fine, Colonel Santos replied calmly. We're not negotiating. We're explaining reality. Your forces planetside have been neutralized. Your ship is under our control. And, in case you're thinking about calling for help, you should know that we've been monitoring your communications for months. Any ship that comes to rescue you will find itself facing people who have had plenty of time to prepare a warm welcome. She gestured to her companions, who carried weapons that were clearly of hybrid human Imperial design. You see, Admiral, you made a fundamental error in your assessment of our species. You saw our cities and our governments, and you assumed that was all we were. But humans aren't just the people who live in cities. We're also the people who live in the spaces between cities. We're the ones who've spent 10,000 years learning to hunt creatures bigger, stronger, and more dangerous than ourselves. Zephrix looked around his bridge, now controlled by humans who had appeared from nowhere and taken over his ship without firing a shot. What do you want? Simple, Colonel Santos replied. You pack up your toys and go home. You tell your empire that Earth is off limits. And, in return, we let you leave with your lives and your dignity intact. And if the empire sends a larger force? Colonel Santos' smile turned predatory. Admiral, you've spent 6 months fighting a few thousand hunters using improvised equipment and homemade weapons. What do you think will happen when 40 million humans who've now had time to study your technology decide to take this fight to other worlds? The implications hit Zephrix like a physical blow. The humans hadn't just defeated his invasion, they had learned from it. They had captured his equipment, studied his tactics, and proven that they could turn human spaces into death traps for Imperial forces. If they took that knowledge to other worlds. Your choice, Admiral, Colonel Santos said quietly. Leave now as a defeated but living commander, or stay and discover what humanity is capable of when we stop playing defense. 3 days later, the Imperial fleet departed Earth's orbit. Admiral Zephrix's report to Imperial Command was brief and, to the point, recommend permanent quarantine of the Sol system. Species demonstrates asymmetric warfare capabilities beyond current Imperial countermeasures. Conquest impossible with acceptable losses. What he didn't mention in his report was the final message Colonel Santos had given him before his release: if we see Imperial ships in this system again, we won't be content to just send you home. We'll follow you back to yours. The Empire had faced many enemies in its expansion across the galaxy. They had defeated high-tech civilizations and crushed primitive societies. But they had never encountered a species that could turn their own strengths against them while fighting a war in spaces the Empire couldn't even see. Earth's hunters had taught the galaxy's greatest empire a lesson it would never forget: never underestimate the people who know how to disappear into their own world and emerge exactly where you least expect them.